My name is Anya Petrova, and I'm a 32-year-old software engineer. For the past 8 years, I'd poured my heart and soul into Novatech Solutions, a mid-sized tech firm nestled in the heart of Silicon Valley. I wasn't just an employee. I was an innovator, a problem solver, and if I dared to say so myself, a vital asset to the team. My days were a whirlwind of coding, debugging, and brainstorming, fueled by copious amounts of coffee and the thrill of creating something new. I thrived on the challenges, the late nights, and the constant pressure to deliver cutting-edge solutions. My colleagues were more than just coworkers. They were my friends, my confidants, my support system in a world that often felt like a relentless competition. We celebrated each other's successes, commiserated over failures, and pushed each other to be better. Life at Novatech was demanding, but it was also incredibly rewarding. I truly believed I was making a difference, contributing to something bigger than myself. I lived in a small but comfortable apartment near the office. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a sanctuary where I could unwind after a long day of battling bugs and algorithms. My evenings were usually spent catching up on the latest tech news, experimenting with new coding languages, or simply relaxing with a good book and a glass of wine. I was content, perhaps even a little complacent, in my carefully constructed world. Everything changed the day Marcus Thorne arrived. He was hired as the new vice president of engineering, a position that I, along with several others, had been vying for. Marcus was everything I wasn't: polished, charismatic, and ruthlessly ambitious. He exuded an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance, and his eyes held a calculating glint that made me uneasy from the moment I met him. He'd come from a rival company, notorious for its cutthroat tactics and its emphasis on profits above all else. I remember the first team meeting he led. He strode into the room, radiating an aura of authority, and immediately began outlining his vision for the future of Novatech. His ideas were bold, even audacious, but they lacked the substance and practicality that had always been the hallmark of our team's work. He dismissed our concerns with a wave of his hand, insisting that we needed to be more aggressive, more innovative, more like him. From that moment on, the atmosphere at Novatech began to shift. The collaborative spirit that had once defined our team was replaced by a sense of competition and unease. Marcus began to implement a series of changes, restructuring departments, reassigning projects, and promoting his own hand-picked favorites. He seemed determined to dismantle the culture that had made Novatech successful, replacing it with his own brand of corporate Darwinism. I found myself increasingly at odds with Marcus. I questioned his decisions, challenged his strategies, and voiced my concerns about the direction he was taking the company. I believed that his focus on short-term gains would ultimately undermine the long-term health of Novatech. But my objections were met with resistance, condescension, and eventually, outright hostility. Marcus saw me as a threat, an obstacle to his ambitions. He began to undermine my authority, exclude me from important meetings, and criticize my work in front of my colleagues. He subtly chipped away at my confidence, making me question my abilities and my value to the company. I started to dread going to work. The joy I had once found in my job was replaced by anxiety and fear. I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, afraid of saying or doing anything that might further provoke Marcus's ire. The stress began to take a toll on my health. I suffered from insomnia, headaches, and a persistent feeling of dread. I lost my appetite and my weight plummeted. I became withdrawn and irritable, snapping at my friends and family. I knew I had to do something, but I felt powerless against Marcus's influence. He had the ear of the CEO, the support of the board, and the backing of a powerful corporate machine. I was just one engineer, a small cog in a vast and complex system. One afternoon, I was called into Marcus's office. He sat behind his large, imposing desk, his eyes cold and calculating. He informed me that my performance was not meeting expectations and that I was being placed on a performance improvement plan, a death sentence in corporate speak. He outlined a series of impossible goals that I was expected to achieve within a ridiculously short time frame. He made it clear that if I failed to meet these goals, I would be terminated. I left his office feeling numb and defeated. I knew that this was the beginning of the end. Marcus was determined to get rid of me, and he would stop at nothing to achieve his goal. I spent the next few weeks working tirelessly, trying to meet the impossible demands that Marcus had set for me. I worked late into the night, sacrificing my weekends and neglecting my personal life. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. Marcus found fault with everything I did, nitpicking my code, criticizing my designs, and questioning my judgment. He seemed to take pleasure in my suffering, relishing the opportunity to exert his power over me. Finally, the inevitable happened. I received a termination letter, citing my failure to meet the performance improvement plan goals. I was devastated. My career, my livelihood, my sense of purpose had all been taken away from me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and utterly lost. As I packed my belongings, I couldn't help but feel a sense of injustice. I had dedicated years of my life to Novatech, pouring my heart and soul into the company. And now, I was being cast aside like a disposable commodity, a victim of corporate politics and personal vendettas. Leaving Novatech that day was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It felt like I was leaving a part of myself behind, a piece of my identity that had been inextricably linked to my work. As I walked out of the building, I made a vow to myself. I would not let Marcus Thorne destroy me. I would not let him win. I would find a way to rebuild my life, to reclaim my career, and to get the revenge I deserved. But how could I possibly fight back against such a powerful and ruthless adversary? My initial reaction was despair. I spent the first few days after my termination in a haze of disbelief and anger. I couldn't understand how someone like Marcus could get away with treating people the way he did. It felt like the world was unfair, and I was powerless to do anything about it. I considered legal action, but after consulting with several lawyers, I realized that it would be a long, expensive, and ultimately futile battle. Marcus had covered his tracks well, and proving his malicious intent would be nearly impossible. Besides, I didn't have the time or the money to waste on a drawn-out legal fight. I needed to focus on rebuilding my life and finding a new job. But the job search proved to be even more challenging than I had anticipated. The tech industry is a small world, and word of my termination from Novatech had spread quickly. Recruiters were hesitant to hire someone who had been fired, even if they suspected that there was more to the story. I sent out hundreds of resumes, attended countless interviews, but received nothing but rejections. The constant rejection took a toll on my self-esteem. I began to doubt my abilities and my worth as an engineer. I wondered if Marcus had been right about me all along. Maybe I wasn't as good as I thought I was. Maybe I didn't deserve to be successful. As the weeks turned into months, my savings dwindled and my anxiety grew. I started having nightmares about Marcus, about being trapped in his office, about being unable to escape his control. I felt like I was drowning, and there was no one to throw me a lifeline. One evening, I was scrolling through LinkedIn when I stumbled upon a post from a former colleague at Novatech, Sarah Chen. Sarah had been one of my closest friends at the company, and I had always admired her intelligence and her integrity. She had left Novatech a few months before my termination, citing a toxic work environment and a lack of opportunities for growth. In her post, Sarah announced that she had started her own software development company, focused on creating innovative solutions for small businesses. She was looking for talented engineers to join her team, and she encouraged anyone interested to reach out to her. A spark of hope flickered within me. Maybe this was the opportunity I had been waiting for. I immediately sent Sarah a message, expressing my interest in her company and asking if she would be willing to meet with me. To my delight, Sarah responded almost immediately, inviting me to come to her office for an interview the following day. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for the interview, researching Sarah's company, and practicing my answers to common interview questions. I was determined to make a good impression and to convince Sarah that I was the right person for the job. The next day, I arrived at Sarah's office, a small but modern space in a co-working facility in downtown San Francisco. Sarah greeted me warmly, her eyes filled with genuine enthusiasm. We sat down in her office, and she began to tell me about her vision for the company and the kind of projects she was working on. I was immediately impressed by her passion and her dedication. She had created a company that was everything Novatech wasn't: collaborative, innovative, and focused on creating positive social impact. As I listened to Sarah, I felt a sense of excitement and optimism that I hadn't felt in months. This was exactly the kind of environment I wanted to work in, a place where I could use my skills and talents to make a difference in the world. After Sarah finished describing her company, she turned to me and asked about my experience and my goals. I told her about my time at Novatech, highlighting my accomplishments and the challenges I had overcome. I also explained the circumstances of my termination, being careful to paint an honest but not overly negative picture of the situation. I could see that Sarah was listening attentively, her expression thoughtful and understanding. When I finished speaking, Sarah paused for a moment before responding. "Anya," she said, "I know what happened to you at Novatech. I've heard the stories, and I know that Marcus Thorne is a terrible person. I also know that you are an incredibly talented engineer, and I would be honored to have you on my team." I was overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. I couldn't believe that Sarah was willing to give me a second chance, to see past my termination and recognize my potential. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "I won't let you down." Sarah smiled warmly. "I know you won't," she said. "Welcome to the team, Anya." I started working at Sarah's company the following week. It was like a breath of fresh air. The atmosphere was positive and supportive, and I felt like I was finally able to use my skills and talents to their full potential. I quickly became an integral part of the team, contributing to several important projects and earning the respect and admiration of my colleagues. As I settled into my new job, I couldn't help but think about Marcus Thorne and the injustice he had inflicted upon me. I knew that I couldn't let him get away with what he had done. I needed to find a way to hold him accountable for his actions and to prevent him from hurting anyone else. But how could I possibly take on such a powerful and ruthless adversary? I was just one engineer, and he was a high-ranking executive with the backing of a powerful corporation. It seemed like an impossible task, but I was determined to find a way. I knew that my career wasn't the only one that Marcus Thorne had destroyed. I started discreetly reaching out to former Novatech employees, the ones who had left after Marcus's arrival. I found them scattered across different companies, some thriving, others still struggling to recover from the toxic environment Marcus had created. As I spoke to them, a pattern emerged. Each of them had a story of being undermined, bullied, or unfairly dismissed by Marcus. They described how he had created a culture of fear and intimidation, where employees were afraid to speak out or challenge his decisions. They recounted instances of him taking credit for their work, sabotaging their projects, and spreading rumors about their performance. The more I learned, the angrier I became. Marcus Thorne was a cancer, infecting every organization he touched. He was a master manipulator, skilled at exploiting people's insecurities and vulnerabilities. He thrived on power and control, and he would stop at nothing to achieve his ambitions. I realized that I couldn't fight him alone. I needed to build a coalition of victims, a network of people who had been wronged by Marcus and were willing to stand up to him. I started organizing secret meetings, inviting former Novatech employees to share their stories and discuss possible courses of action. At first, people were hesitant to get involved. They were afraid of retaliation, of being blacklisted in the industry. But as they listened to each other's experiences, they began to realize that they were not alone. They had all been victims of the same abuse, and they had a shared interest in bringing Marcus to justice. Slowly but surely, a sense of solidarity began to emerge. People started to feel empowered, to believe that they could make a difference if they worked together. We decided to create a website, a platform where we could anonymously share our stories about Marcus Thorne's misconduct. We called it the Thorne Files, a play on words that hinted at the secrets and lies that Marcus had been hiding. We encouraged anyone who had been affected by Marcus to submit their experiences, and we promised to protect their identities. The website quickly gained traction. Former and current Novatech employees, as well as people who had worked with Marcus at other companies, began to share their stories. The Thorne Files became a repository of evidence, documenting Marcus's pattern of abuse and misconduct. The stories were shocking and disturbing. They revealed a man who was not only a bully and a manipulator, but also a liar and a cheat. He had falsified data, embezzled funds, and engaged in insider trading. He had created a hostile work environment where employees were subjected to harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. As the Thorne Files grew, it began to attract the attention of the media. Several news outlets contacted us, wanting to report on the allegations against Marcus Thorne. We were hesitant to speak to the media at first, fearing that it would expose our identities and put us at risk. But we realized that publicity was our best weapon. If we could bring Marcus's misconduct to light, we could force Novatech to take action and hold him accountable for his actions. We decided to cooperate with a team of investigative journalists from a major newspaper. We provided them with all the evidence we had gathered, including the stories from the Thorn files, as well as internal documents and emails that proved Marcus's wrongdoing. The journalists spent months investigating the allegations, verifying the facts, and interviewing sources. Finally, they were ready to publish their story. The article appeared on the front page of the newspaper, with the headline, "The Toxic Reign of Marcus Thorn: How One Executive Ruined a Company and Destroyed Lives." The article detailed Marcus's history of abuse and misconduct, citing specific examples and quoting former employees. It also revealed the extent of his financial improprieties and his involvement in insider trading. The article was a bombshell. It sent shockwaves through the tech industry and beyond. Novatech's stock price plummeted, and the company's reputation was severely damaged. Marcus Thorn was immediately placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, also launched an investigation into his financial dealings. I felt a sense of vindication, of satisfaction that I had finally been able to expose Marcus for who he really was. But I knew that the fight was far from over. Marcus Thorn was a powerful man, and he would not go down without a fight. He had the resources and the connections to hire the best lawyers and public relations experts. He would try to discredit the allegations against him, to paint himself as a victim of a witch hunt. I knew that I had to be prepared for a long and difficult battle. The stress of the situation began to take a toll on me. I was constantly worried about being exposed, about being sued, about being targeted by Marcus's allies. I had trouble sleeping, and I started having panic attacks. I knew that I couldn't let the fear consume me. I had to stay strong, for myself, and for all the other victims of Marcus Thorn. I had come too far to back down now, but how far was Marcus willing to go to protect his reputation and his power? The aftermath of the article's publication was chaotic. Novatech was in damage control mode, scrambling to contain the fallout from the revelations about Marcus Thorn. The board of directors hired an independent law firm to conduct an internal investigation, and they promised to cooperate fully with the SEC's inquiry. Marcus, meanwhile, went into hiding. He lawyered up and issued a statement denying all the allegations against him. He claimed that he was the victim of a disgruntled group of former employees who were trying to destroy his reputation. He accused me and the other organizers of the Thorn files of defamation and threatened to sue us for damages. I was terrified. I knew that Marcus had the resources to make our lives miserable. He could drag us into court, bankrupt us with legal fees, and ruin our reputations. But I also knew that we couldn't back down. We had come too far, and we had too much at stake. We had to stand our ground and fight for justice. We hired our own lawyer, a tenacious and experienced litigator named Emily Carter. Emily was a fierce advocate for her clients, and she was not afraid to take on powerful adversaries. She advised us to remain anonymous and to avoid making any public statements. She also warned us that Marcus would likely try to intimidate us and discredit us. She prepared us for the worst and assured us that she would do everything in her power to protect us. As the internal investigation at Novatech progressed, more and more evidence of Marcus's misconduct came to light. Employees who had been afraid to speak out before now felt emboldened to come forward with their stories. They provided investigators with documents, emails, and testimonies that corroborated the allegations in the Thorn files. The investigation revealed that Marcus had engaged in a wide range of unethical and illegal activities, including falsifying financial records, embezzling company funds, and engaging in insider trading. He had also created a hostile work environment where employees were subjected to harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. The board of directors was appalled by the findings of the investigation. It had been misled by Marcus, who had presented himself as a visionary leader and a successful executive. They realized that they had made a terrible mistake in hiring him, and they were determined to rectify the situation. They immediately terminated Marcus's employment and announced that they would be cooperating fully with the SEC's investigation. The SEC investigation moved quickly. The agency had been building a case against Marcus for months, based on tips and leads from various sources. The information from the Thorn files and the internal investigation at Novatech provided them with the final pieces of the puzzle. They filed charges against Marcus, alleging securities fraud, insider trading, and obstruction of justice. The charges carried a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison and millions of dollars in fines. Marcus was finally brought to justice. He was arrested at his mansion in Atherton, California, and he was held in jail pending trial. He pleaded not guilty to the charges, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The trial was a media circus. The courtroom was packed with reporters, and the proceedings were broadcast live on television. The prosecution presented a compelling case, calling numerous witnesses who testified about Marcus's misconduct. The defense tried to discredit the witnesses and to argue that Marcus was being unfairly targeted, but the jury was not convinced. After deliberating for several days, they found Marcus guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to pay millions of dollars in restitution to his victims. I watched the verdict on television, surrounded by the other organizers of the Thorn files. We were elated. We had finally achieved our goal. Marcus Thorn had been held accountable for his actions, and he would spend the next 15 years of his life behind bars. We celebrated our victory with champagne and tears. We had faced a formidable adversary, but we had persevered. We had stood up to power and corruption, and we had won. The aftermath of the trial was transformative. Novatech began to rebuild its reputation and its culture. The company hired a new CEO, a woman who was committed to creating a positive and ethical work environment. She implemented a series of reforms, including strengthening the company's ethics policies, creating a confidential hotline for reporting misconduct, and providing training on harassment and discrimination. The company also reached out to the former employees who had been affected by Marcus's misconduct, offering them apologies and compensation. Many of them accepted the offers and returned to work at Novatech. I was offered a position at Novatech as well, but I declined. I had moved on with my life, and I was happy at Sarah's company. I had no desire to return to the place where I had suffered so much, but I was grateful for the apology and the recognition of the harm that had been done to me. The experience of fighting Marcus Thorn had changed me. It had made me stronger, more resilient, and more determined to stand up for what is right. I had learned that even the most powerful and ruthless individuals can be brought to justice if people are willing to work together and fight for their rights. But even with Marcus behind bars and Novatech working to rebuild, could I truly put the past behind me? Life settled into a new normal. At Sarah's company, I thrived, contributing to meaningful projects and building strong relationships with my colleagues. The toxic cloud that had once hung over my career had dissipated, replaced by a sense of purpose and accomplishment. However, the scars of the past remained. I still had nightmares about Marcus, and the fear of encountering someone like him lingered in the back of my mind. I found myself constantly on guard, scrutinizing people's motives and questioning their intentions. Emily, our lawyer, became a trusted friend. We often met for coffee, discussing not just legal matters, but also the emotional toll the entire ordeal had taken on us. She helped me understand that healing was a process, not an event, and that it was okay to still feel the pain of the past. One afternoon, Emily called me with some unexpected news. "Anya," she said, "I have something to tell you about Marcus Thorn." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "He's trying to appeal his conviction," Emily said. "His lawyers are arguing that the evidence against him was insufficient and that the jury was biased." I felt a wave of anger wash over me. "That's ridiculous," I said. "The evidence was overwhelming. He's just trying to get out of prison." "I know," Emily said, "but his lawyers are very skilled and they have a good chance of winning the appeal. If they do, Marcus could be released from prison and he could even sue you and the other organizers of the Thorn files for defamation." I was devastated. I couldn't believe that Marcus might actually get away with his crimes. I had worked so hard to bring him to justice, and now it seemed like it was all for nothing. "What can we do?" I asked Emily. "We have to fight back," she said. "We have to show the court that Marcus is a dangerous and manipulative man and that he should not be released from prison." Emily proposed that we gather additional evidence of Marcus's misconduct and present it to the court. She also suggested that we organize a public campaign to raise awareness about his crimes and to put pressure on the court to deny his appeal. I agreed to do whatever it took to keep Marcus behind bars. I contacted the other organizers of the Thorn Files and told them about Marcus's appeal. They were just as outraged as I was, and they pledged to help in any way they could. We started working around the clock, gathering additional evidence of Marcus's misconduct. We contacted former Novatech employees who had not yet come forward, and we persuaded them to share their stories. We also searched for documents and emails that might shed light on Marcus's crimes. As we dug deeper, we uncovered even more shocking details about Marcus's past. We learned that he had been fired from several previous jobs for similar acts of misconduct. He had a history of bullying, harassment, and financial improprieties. We also discovered that he had been involved in a money laundering scheme with a Russian oligarch. The evidence was damning. It painted a picture of a man who was not only a criminal, but also a danger to society. We presented the evidence to the court, along with a petition signed by thousands of people who demanded that Marcus's appeal be denied. The court listened to our arguments and reviewed the evidence. After several weeks of deliberation, they issued their ruling. They denied Marcus's appeal. The court found that the evidence against him was overwhelming and that he had received a fair trial. They also ruled that he was a danger to society and that he should remain in prison. I was overjoyed. We had won again. Marcus Thorn would not be getting out of prison anytime soon. We had successfully defended ourselves against his appeal, and we had reaffirmed our commitment to justice. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Marcus Thorn. It was postmarked from the prison where he was being held. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The letter was written in a shaky, uneven hand. It was filled with anger, resentment, and threats. Marcus accused me of ruining his life, and he vowed to get revenge on me when he got out of prison. He said that he would never forgive me for what I had done to him. I was terrified. Marcus was still a dangerous man, even behind bars. He had nothing to lose, and he was clearly consumed by hatred and a desire for revenge. I showed the letter to Emily, and she immediately contacted the authorities. They launched an investigation into Marcus's activities in prison, and they took steps to ensure that he would not be able to contact me or the other organizers of the Thorn Files. I tried to put the letter out of my mind, but it haunted me for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was still watching me, still plotting his revenge. I knew that I had to take steps to protect myself. I installed a security system in my apartment, and I started carrying pepper spray with me whenever I went out. I also took a self-defense class, just in case. But despite all my precautions, I still felt vulnerable. I knew that Marcus was a master manipulator, and he could find a way to get to me, even from behind bars. One evening, I was walking home from work when I noticed a strange car following me. It was a black sedan with tinted windows. I tried to ignore it, but it stayed behind me for several blocks. I started to panic. I quickened my pace, but the car kept up with me. Finally, I reached my apartment building and I ran inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me. I peeked through the peephole and saw the black sedan drive past. I was shaken but relieved. I called the police and reported the incident. They took my statement and promised to investigate, but I knew that it was probably just a coincidence. It was unlikely that Marcus had anything to do with it, but the incident served as a reminder that I could never truly let my guard down. Marcus Thorn would always be a threat, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. But I refused to let him control my life. I had come too far to be intimidated by him. I would continue to live my life to the fullest, to pursue my dreams, and to stand up for what is right. I would not let Marcus Thorn win. But what if his reach extended beyond prison walls, and his thirst for revenge found a new, unexpected avenue years past? Marcus remained in prison, his appeals exhausted, his name fading from the headlines. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I continued to thrive at Sarah's company, eventually becoming a senior engineer and leading my own team. The scars of the past began to fade, replaced by a sense of resilience and gratitude. I even started dating again, cautiously opening myself up to the possibility of love. One sunny afternoon, while working on a particularly challenging project, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read simply, "Closure." Intrigued and slightly apprehensive, I opened the message. It contained a single attachment, a photograph. As I clicked on the file, my breath caught in my throat. The photograph showed Marcus Thorne sitting in a wheelchair, looking frail and defeated. His eyes, once filled with malice, were now vacant and hollow. A brief message accompanied the photo. He suffered a stroke, paralysis on his right side, speech impaired. He is a shell of his former self. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Relief, certainly, that he was no longer a threat. Pity, perhaps, for the man he had become. And a strange sense of closure as the email promised. It was over. The battle was finally, truly over. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. The weight that I had been carrying for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a feeling of lightness and freedom. I realized that I had finally forgiven Marcus Thorne, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved it. I deserved to move on with my life, to let go of the anger and resentment that had been poisoning my soul. I deserved to be happy. I never found out who sent me the email and the photograph. It remained a mystery, a final, unexpected twist in a long and winding saga. But I didn't need to know. The message had been delivered, and I had received it. I had found closure. As I looked out the window at the bustling city below, I realized how far I had come. I had faced adversity, overcome challenges, and emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. I had learned the importance of standing up for what is right, of fighting for justice, and of never giving up hope. I had also learned the power of forgiveness and the importance of letting go of the past. And as I turned back to my work, a new project, a new challenge, I knew that I was ready for whatever the future might hold. The past was behind me. The future was mine. But as I continued my day, I couldn't help but wonder if the email truly was closure, or if it was just the beginning of another, even more unexpected chapter. Had I truly escaped Marcus's web, or was I still caught in its tangled threads, destined to face another, unforeseen consequence of his actions? Only time would tell. The thought lingered, a nagging doubt that refused to be silenced. I tried to dismiss it, to focus on the present, but the image of Marcus, broken and defeated, kept flashing in my mind. It wasn't enough. It couldn't be. Someone like him didn't just fade away quietly. He had to have a contingency plan, a final act of vengeance waiting to be unleashed. I decided to discreetly investigate. Using my tech skills, I started digging into Marcus's past, searching for any clues that might indicate his next move. I scoured his online accounts, his financial records, his communications with associates. I even hired a private investigator to look into his activities in prison. The deeper I dug, the more uneasy I became. I discovered that Marcus had been secretly communicating with a network of offshore accounts, funneling money to unknown recipients. He had also been corresponding with several individuals who had previously worked for him, people who were known for their ruthlessness and their willingness to do anything for money. It became clear that Marcus was planning something. He was using his remaining resources to orchestrate a final act of revenge, a scheme that would target me and the other organizers of the Thorne files. I knew that I had to stop him, but how could I possibly thwart his plans when he was safely locked away in prison? I decided to reach out to Sarah and Emily, the two women who had been my closest allies in this fight. I told them about my fears and about the evidence I had uncovered. They were both concerned, but also determined to help. We formed a plan. We would work together to expose Marcus's scheme and to prevent him from carrying it out. We started by contacting the authorities. We presented them with the evidence we had gathered, and we urged them to investigate Marcus's activities in prison. They were initially skeptical, but after reviewing the evidence, they agreed to take our concerns seriously. They launched an internal investigation into Marcus's communications and his financial transactions. They also increased security measures at the prison to prevent him from communicating with the outside world. While the authorities investigated, we decided to take matters into our own hands. We hired a team of cybersecurity experts to track Marcus's online activities and to identify the individuals who were working with him. We also contacted several investigative journalists who were eager to report on the story. We knew that publicity was our best weapon. If we could expose Marcus's scheme to the world, we could prevent him from carrying it out. As we delved deeper into Marcus's network, we began to uncover a disturbing plot. He was planning to use his offshore accounts to fund a smear campaign against me and the other organizers of the Thorne files. He had hired a team of hackers to steal our personal information and to spread false and damaging rumors about us online. He was also planning to file a series of frivolous lawsuits designed to drain our resources and to silence us. But the most shocking discovery was that Marcus had hired a hitman to assassinate me. He had offered a large sum of money to a professional killer who had agreed to carry out the hit. I was terrified. I knew that Marcus was capable of anything, and I had no doubt that he would follow through with his plan. I contacted the police and told them about the assassination plot. They took my concerns seriously and assigned a team of detectives to protect me. They also launched a manhunt for the hitman. The next few weeks were the most harrowing of my life. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that the hitman was lurking around every corner. I stayed in safe houses, changed my phone number, and avoided public places. I felt like I was living in a spy movie, but I refused to be intimidated. I was determined to stop Marcus and to bring him to justice. As the police closed in on the hitman, Marcus's scheme began to unravel. The cybersecurity experts we had hired were able to identify the individuals who were working with him and to expose their activities to the authorities. The investigative journalists we had contacted published a series of articles about Marcus's plot, which generated widespread outrage and condemnation. Faced with mounting pressure, Marcus's network began to crumble. His offshore accounts were frozen, his associates were arrested, and the hitman was apprehended. Marcus's final act of revenge had been thwarted. He had failed. But even in defeat, Marcus refused to give up. He continued to plot and scheme, even from behind bars. I knew that I could never truly let my guard down. Marcus Thorne would always be a threat, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And so I made a vow to myself. I would continue to fight for justice, to stand up to bullies, and to protect the vulnerable. I would never let Marcus Thorne win. My life would be a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of forgiveness, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. I would carry the scars of the past, but I would not let them define me. I would use my experiences to make a difference in the world, to create a better future for myself and for others. And as I looked towards the horizon, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with courage, with determination, and with an unyielding spirit. For I was Anya Petrova, and I would not be broken. But I wondered if this was really the end, or simply a new beginning to a different kind of fight, one that was less about revenge and more about healing. But I wondered if this was really the end, or simply a new beginning to a different kind of fight, one that was less about revenge and more about healing. I worked hard to believe the worst was over. My days at Sarah's company were filled with rewarding challenges. The team was buzzing with excitement over our latest project, developing an app to connect local farmers with consumers, cutting out the big corporations, and supporting sustainable agriculture. It was exactly the kind of work I craved, something that used my skills for good. My evenings were filled with a newfound sense of normalcy. I started taking pottery classes, rediscovering a creative side I had neglected for years. The feel of the clay between my fingers was soothing, a welcome contrast to the sterile world of code. I even started dating a kind and thoughtful architect named David. He was the opposite of Marcus, gentle and supportive, with a genuine interest in my well-being. We went on hikes in the Marin Headlands, explored hidden cafes in North Beach, and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly happy. Yet a nagging feeling persisted, a sense that something was still amiss. It was like a faint hum in the background, a subtle dissonance that I couldn't quite place. I tried to ignore it to focus on the positive aspects of my life, but the feeling wouldn't go away. One Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office to find Sarah looking unusually pale. She waved me into her office and closed the door behind me. "Anya, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Just received a call from an old colleague at Novatech." My heart sank. "What did they say?" I asked, bracing myself for the worst. "They said that Marcus Thorne is being released from prison." I stared at her in disbelief. "That's impossible," I said. "His appeal was denied. He's supposed to be in prison for 15 years. "Apparently he's been granted a compassionate release," Sarah said. "He's terminally ill. He has advanced stage cancer, and he's not expected to live more than a few months." I was stunned. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Relief that he was dying, anger that he was getting away with his crimes, and a strange sense of unease that he was being released back into the world. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't know," Sarah said. But we need to be careful. Marcus is still a dangerous man, even on his deathbed. We spent the rest of the day discussing our options. We contacted Emily, our lawyer, and filled her in on the situation. She advised us to increase our security measures and to be vigilant. She also warned us that Marcus might try to contact us, either directly or through intermediaries. As I drove home that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus's release was a bad omen. It felt like the calm before the storm, a prelude to something terrible. I arrived at my apartment to find a package waiting for me on my doorstep. It was a small, unmarked box. I hesitated before picking it up, my heart pounding in my chest. Could it be from Marcus? I carefully carried the box inside and placed it on my kitchen table. I grabbed a knife and slowly opened the package. Inside, I found a single object, a small, hand-carved wooden bird. It was beautiful, intricate, and eerily familiar. I stared at the bird for a long time, trying to remember where I had seen it before. Then it hit me. It was the same type of bird that my grandmother used to carve. She had passed away many years ago, but I still had a few of her carvings stored in a box in my closet. I rushed to the closet and pulled out the box. I opened it and compared the bird from the package to the ones that my grandmother had carved. They were identical. The craftsmanship was the same, the wood was the same, even the paint was the same. It was clear that the bird in the package was one of my grandmother's carvings. But how could that be? How could Marcus have gotten his hands on one of my grandmother's carvings? My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Then I remembered something that my grandmother had told me many years ago. She had said that she had given one of her carvings to a young boy who lived down the street from her. The boy's name was Marcus. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be, could it? Was it possible that Marcus Thorne was the same boy who had received a carving from my grandmother many years ago? If so, what did it mean? Why had he sent me this bird? Was it a threat, a message, or something else entirely? The questions swirled in my mind, leaving me feeling confused, frightened, and deeply unsettled. What I didn't know was that finding out about the past would lead me to discover more about the present. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of determination. I had to find out the truth about Marcus and the wooden bird. I started by contacting my aunt, my grandmother's only surviving child. She lived in a small town in Northern California, and I hadn't seen her in years. I explained the situation to her and asked if she remembered anything about my grandmother giving a carving to a boy named Marcus. She paused for a moment, thinking. "Yes, I do remember something like that," she said. "Your grandmother was always giving away her carvings to the neighborhood kids. There was one boy in particular, a quiet, lonely child named Marcus. She seemed to have a soft spot for him." "Did you know his last name?" I asked. "No, I don't think so," she said. "But I remember that he moved away not long after your grandmother gave him the carving. His family was having some financial problems and they had to move to a different state." That confirmed it. Marcus Thorne was the same boy who had received a carving from my grandmother. But why had he sent it to me now, after all these years? I thanked my aunt for her help and hung up the phone. I decided to visit my grandmother's old house. It was still standing, although it had been sold to a new family after her death. I drove to the house and knocked on the door. A young woman answered. I explained who I was and asked if I could take a look around. She was hesitant at first, but after I told her about my grandmother and the carvings, she agreed to let me in. The house was much smaller than I remembered. It was filled with new furniture and decorations, but I could still sense my grandmother's presence. I walked through the rooms, trying to recall memories from my childhood. I stopped in the living room, where my grandmother used to sit and carve her wooden birds. I looked around, searching for any clues that might shed light on Marcus's motives. Then I noticed something on the mantelpiece. It was a small, framed photograph. I picked it up and examined it closely. It was a picture of my grandmother and a young boy. The boy was small and skinny, with dark hair and piercing eyes. It was Marcus. I stared at the photograph, feeling a strange connection to this boy, this man who had caused me so much pain. I wondered what had happened to him, what had turned him into the ruthless and vindictive person he had become. I thanked the woman for letting me look around and left the house. As I drove away, I realized that I needed to confront Marcus. I needed to ask him why he had sent me the bird, why he had targeted me, and what he hoped to achieve. I contacted Emily and asked her to arrange a meeting with Marcus. She was reluctant at first, but after I explained that I needed closure, she agreed to help. She contacted Marcus's lawyer and requested a meeting. To our surprise, Marcus agreed. He was being held in a prison hospital due to his deteriorating health. Emily arranged for us to visit him the following week. As the day of the visit approached, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that I needed to face Marcus one last time. The next day, armed with the truth, I prepared to confront the reason for my pain. This wouldn't be a quest for revenge, but a quest for answers, no matter how difficult they were to hear. The prison hospital was a bleak and sterile place, a far cry from the opulent offices and luxurious homes that Marcus had once inhabited. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and despair. Emily and I were led through a maze of corridors to a small, sparsely furnished room. A guard stood outside the door, watching us intently. Inside the room, Marcus sat in a wheelchair, his body thin and frail. His skin was pale and translucent, and his eyes were sunken and lifeless. He looked like a ghost of his former self. I approached him cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello, Marcus," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He looked up at me, his eyes widening slightly. "Anya," he said, his voice raspy and weak. "I wasn't expecting you." "I wanted to talk to you," I said. "I wanted to ask you why you sent me the bird." He looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Yes, you do," I said. "The wooden bird. The one that my grandmother carved. You sent it to me." He remained silent for a moment. Then he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a strange mix of emotions. "I wanted you to know that I hadn't forgotten her," he said. "She was the only person who ever showed me any kindness." I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" I asked. "When I was a kid, my family was very poor," he said. "My parents were always fighting, and they often neglected me. I was a lonely and unhappy child. Your grandmother was the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered," he continued. "She would invite me over to her house, give me cookies, and tell me stories. She even gave me one of her carvings. I treasured that carving," he said. "It was the only thing that I had that was truly mine. But then my family moved away and I lost touch with your grandmother," he said. "I never forgot her, though. I always remembered her kindness. When I became successful, I tried to find her," he said, "but it was too late. She had already passed away. When I saw you at Novatech, I recognized your last name," he said. "I knew that you were related to her. I wanted to get to know you," he said. "I wanted to thank you for your grandmother's kindness, but I didn't know how. I was afraid that you would hate me if you knew who I was," he said. "I knew that I had done terrible things and I didn't deserve your forgiveness. So I decided to keep my distance," he said. "But I couldn't resist sending you the bird. It was a way of letting you know that I hadn't forgotten your grandmother and that I was grateful for her kindness." I stared at him, speechless. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was it possible that Marcus, the ruthless and vindictive man who had caused me so much pain, was actually capable of remorse? "Why did you target me?" I asked. "Why did you try to ruin my life?" He looked down at his hands again, his fingers trembling even more. "I was angry," he said. "I was angry at the world, angry at myself, angry at your grandmother for dying. I know it doesn't make sense," he said, "but I felt like if I could destroy you, I could somehow get revenge on the world for all the pain that I had suffered. I was wrong," he said. "I know that now. I was blinded by anger and resentment. I'm sorry, Anya," he said. "I'm truly sorry for everything that I did to you." I looked at him, searching his eyes for any sign of deception, but I saw nothing but remorse and regret. I realized that he was telling the truth. He was truly sorry. A wave of forgiveness washed over me. I realized that I couldn't hold on to my anger and resentment any longer. It was time to let go. "I forgive you, Marcus," I said. He looked up at me, his eyes filling with tears. "Thank you, Anya," he said. "Thank you for giving me peace." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Then I stood up to leave. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said. "Goodbye, Anya," he said. As I walked out of the room, I felt a sense of closure that I had never thought possible. I had finally confronted my past, and I had found a way to forgive. As I left, the nagging feeling of something being amiss finally subsided, replaced by a quiet understanding that would shape my future. But was that understanding accurate, or would there be a last-moment twist? As Emily and I walked out of the prison hospital, I felt a lightness that I hadn't experienced in years. I had finally confronted Marcus, and I had found a way to forgive him. I realized that holding on to anger and resentment only hurt myself. Forgiveness was the key to moving on with my life. We drove back to San Francisco in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. When we arrived at my apartment, Emily turned to me. "Are you okay, Anya?" she asked. I'm okay, I said. I think I finally understand. Understand what? She asked. That revenge is never the answer, I said. It only creates more pain and suffering. Forgiveness is the only way to break the cycle. Emily smiled. I'm proud of you, Anya, she said. You've come a long way. I hugged her goodbye and went inside my apartment. I sat down on my couch and closed my eyes. I thought about Marcus, about his troubled childhood, about his misguided attempts at revenge, and about his final act of remorse. I realized that he was a victim, just as I was. He had been damaged by his past, and he had lashed out at the world in an attempt to ease his pain. But his actions had only created more pain, both for himself and for others. I knew that I couldn't change the past, but I could learn from it. I could use my experiences to help others who were struggling with anger, resentment, and forgiveness. I decided to start a support group for victims of abuse and trauma. I wanted to create a safe space where people could share their stories, heal from their wounds, and find a path towards forgiveness. I contacted Sarah and asked if she would help me. She was enthusiastic about the idea, and she offered to provide office space and administrative support. We created a website, designed brochures, and spread the word about our support group. To our surprise, we received an overwhelming response. People from all walks of life reached out to us, eager to share their experiences and to connect with others who understood what they were going through. Our support group quickly became a thriving community. We held weekly meetings, organized workshops, and hosted guest speakers. We provided counseling, therapy, and legal assistance to those who needed it. We helped people to heal from their wounds, to forgive their abusers, and to move on with their lives. As I watched our support group grow and flourish, I felt a sense of purpose that I had never experienced before. I realized that I had found my calling. I was meant to help others to heal, to forgive, and to find peace. One evening, as I was preparing for a support group meeting, I received a phone call from a nurse at the prison hospital. I'm calling to inform you that Marcus Thorne has passed away, she said. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of relief. Marcus was finally at peace. I thanked the nurse for calling and hung up the phone. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. I said a silent prayer for Marcus, for his soul, and for his journey to the other side. Then I opened my eyes and smiled. I knew that Marcus was gone, but his legacy would live on. He had taught me the importance of forgiveness, the power of compassion, and the transformative potential of healing. And as I walked into the support group meeting, ready to share my story and to help others find their own path towards peace, I knew that I was finally free. As I was about to start, a new member walked into the room. The new member shared a resemblance with Thorne, too much to be a coincidence. Was this the last twist, his last attempt at getting into my head? It was time to find out.